Welcome everyone to another segment of Health and Aging. My name is Gabriel with Homestead here in Miami. Today I have the pleasure to be joined with Reverend Dr. Dale Allen Young. He's a board certified chaplain and grief educator. Dr. Young is the founder and president of Global Grief Support Inc., a nonprofit organization with the mission to provide grief support training in the aftermath of natural disasters. The mission of Global Grief Support Inc. began when Dr. Young served as a director of Congregational Health, a faith health partnership between Baptist Health South Florida and faith communities of all denominations in Miami-Dade and Broward County. Dr. Young is also the author of How to Take Your Spiritual Temperature, 10 Dimensions of Spirituality from Angst to Joy, and the Spiritual Temperature Companion Workbook. You can find more information on those titles at soulfresh.org. Thank you, Reverend Young, for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Nice to see you again. And I love the Homestead concept. Very valuable for seniors and baby boomers. So let's get into it.
All right. So what are some key challenges of baby boomers?
Well, first of all, baby boomers are those who were born from 1945 to 1962. One of the things that we'll note is that baby boomers live longer than their previous generation. So the challenges are, what do you do with an additional 30 years of life? And there are financial challenges. Well, do you have enough savings to live an extra period of time? Will the money run out before your life does? That's a challenge. Then there's the challenge of involvement versus estrangement. Involvement is community connection, social support, and estrangement would be isolation and solitude, loneliness. Another challenge is redefining your life purpose for your third age. What are you going to do with all that time? You might get tired of just playing golf every day or sitting on the front porch, whatever. So redefining your life purpose is a challenge. And then your health challenges. As you live longer, what are some of the health challenges that you will encounter that you wouldn't have, or your parents' generation may not have because they didn't live as long as you? And then finally, how to adapt to the technology. Now, as a grandparent, how do I connect to my grandchildren, right? But those are overall challenges. There are also emotional challenges and there are spiritual challenges. We may get to that.
So when you say that baby boomers have lived 30 years more than their parents, is that why it's called the third age?
Generally consider the first age is when you're a child in education. The second age is your career, and the third age is the time from the time you retire until the time that you have your final decline. Your final decline is called your fourth age. What's happened is the third age has grown significantly. It's a much longer period of time. So seniors, it may have been in your parents' generation, they would retire and then in a few years they would die, right? What happens now overall for most people is they retire and they have a couple, maybe even 2 or 3 decades to live and enjoy their life, called the golden age. And what do you do at that time? What's your life mission? How do you live your life with meaning and purpose during that period of time? So that's the third age.
So would you say that this pandemic has really forced older adults to kind of get with the technology wave? By being isolated, my mom even knows how to FaceTime now. So it really, there has been a learning curve there.
There's been a learning curve. It's been a blessing on the one hand, but COVID has serious impact on emotional and spiritual connection. The fact that we have loved ones dying in the hospital and we can't visit. This is especially true for Hispanic and African American families. They're so close and now nobody can show up. So that's really a problem. Dying alone is really psychologically and spiritually. But on the other hand, we have learned technology this year that brings us closer. So we're doing this around the world. My wife is from Chile and her mother is in the 90s and they talk every day.
That's wonderful. Well, we were forced to fast forward into the future. So can you tell us a little bit about your research project of baby boomer spirituality?
Yeah, we gathered baby boomers in 3 different places and they were mostly church affiliated. And we asked them questions like, as you prepare for or think about what you're going to do with your extra 30 years during your golden age, right? have you thought about your spiritual story? And how would you connect your spiritual story to planning your golden age, your retirement plan? We think in terms of you get a financial planner to plan your golden age, but who thinks about projecting your spiritual story and making that period of time of value in terms of your life meaning and purpose and your beliefs and your values, and can you project that into the future? So we look at that and we ask people, well, have you thought about what is your spiritual story? And about 80% of them couldn't say what their spiritual story was, right? So we thought about what are the spiritual tasks of the third age? And there again, we had like 65% of the people could not think about that. They didn't know how to even engage that question. But by the time we were through with the course, 90% were able to do that. One of my favorite examples is Jimmy Carter, retired, but for the last 20, 30 years, he's been building houses with Habitat for Humanity.
He sure has.
So he's investing his time to do something that's meaningful, purposeful, that has spiritual value, that's connected to his spiritual values. That makes life meaningful. So it's not about the money. It's about doing something with your life that gives meaning and purpose. I know there was a secretary who worked her whole life just as a secretary, and she retired, moved down to the Homestead area, decided that she wanted to help volunteer to teach young school children reading and writing. So she helped them with their literacy, helped them to read, and she would go to the school and read with children and volunteer, and she loved it. So it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, you still can be involved in doing something that is meaningful, that synchronizes with your spiritual values. So the first task of that is, what's my spirituality? What are my spiritual values? What is it that I would like to take out of my life story and project it into the future in a way that leaves a legacy? Think about this. They say that one of the things that we looked at was, is it retirement or is it refirement? Right? You've probably heard that terminology. Refirement is, think about your life in a way as, what is the legacy that you're going to leave? So your legacy is your encore, right? At the theater, the last song is the encore, right? It's the last thing that people will hear. Okay, so with my life, what is my encore, right?
Now there has to be, I think those are some complex emotional challenges to that, because most people define themselves with what they do for a living. Now all of a sudden you're retired, you no longer have that. You have this void. It's almost like you have to reinvent yourself. How do you assist baby boomers with those emotional challenges?
The first thing is, let's get in touch with our spiritual core. What is our spiritual story, right? And what is my spiritual self? And what's the story that I want to project into the future? So while I was doing my doctorate, I was still at Baptist, right? But I was thinking about, what am I going to do when I retire? And the result of that was the formation of a nonprofit organization to do grief support after natural disasters. So this is my legacy. This is my encore career, right? It's not about what I did in 30 years of chaplaincy. It's what I'm doing now. That's an example of encore career, or your last song. You're leaving your legacy, right? So but the starting point is, look at, what is your spiritual story? When we asked people initially, what is your spiritual narrative, they couldn't describe it, right?
That's a tough question.
Yeah, it is. So that's why. And when people think of spirituality, they think, oh, it's just me and God. But the truth is, there are 10 dimensions of spirituality. Right? Me and my walk with God is the only dimension that people think about. But there's your social connection, your social situation, issues of justice, our life story, our survivability, our life meaning and purpose, our beliefs and our values, our intimacy and community, our relationships with our family. So there are areas of spirituality in each of these different 10 areas. So I'll give you an example of a parents lost a child because they took, this is in Chile, they took their sick child to a clinic and they waited in the waiting room, and the people in the clinic said there's no room, there's no bed available. And so the child ended up dying in the waiting room, waiting to see a doctor. They found out later that there was a bed available, but they didn't want to give the bed to that family because they were holding the bed for a paying patient, right? And this was a poor family. So they lost their child there. They were so upset, so angry, that they began a campaign so that this would not happen to any other parent, right? So they became engaged in that and in community organizing and involved in a campaign to bring justice, right? So for them, the issue of justice for children became their spiritual quest, their spiritual energy, purpose, their mission. That's an example where justice becomes one of the key issues in terms of their spirituality. But we can look at other areas. We can look at people who have been tossed out of their family. They've been rejected for some reason. They find themselves going through one life crisis after another. So that's why I wrote the book, basically to do training in this area. But it's also valuable for anybody that wants to explore those areas. Yeah, if I hold up this book. So the first book was How to Take Your Spiritual Temperature, 10 Dimensions of Spirituality. Each chapter goes through the 10 dimensions. What I wanted to do was I wanted to help people who are facilitating spiritual groups. So I created a second book, which is the workbook. And this is more like a journal. For each chapter, the individuals have an opportunity to journal, share questions, ask one another what their results are. So one person may feel very close to God, but very rejected in terms of social situations and community, right? So that's how the spirituality of your life story instructs you of how to face the current situation with courage, with belief, with confidence, right? Than somebody who may be younger and has never had that kind of experience. So these are some areas of examples of spirituality and how they influence our overall spiritual story.
What I've noticed with our own clients is that the ones that do have their tight relationships in order, they still are communicating with their friends. They have a loving family. They commune with nature. They're healthier overall. They just are healthier. Like most about your workbook is it doesn't matter where you are on that spectrum. The goal is to get you to start.
Right.
And you've got some very heavy topics in there with those 10 dimensions of spirituality that you're going to hit on something eventually with someone, and it's going to resonate, and they'll be able to start that journey.
Absolutely.
How were you able to get over those challenges? I mean, you had some serious unpacking there for you. And how were you able to already see yourself in retirement? Because that's a problem that I think a lot of people face. Before you know it, they retire. How were you able to prepare yourself and start that journey before you even got to retirement?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I was doing the research and working with baby boomers for my doctorate, and at the same time, of course, thinking about myself, right? What am I going to do? Because I did the research before I retired. You know, I got my doctorate while I was still at Baptist. Of course, I thought about these issues for myself. What could I be doing that is of value that I can take? I have this life experience where I've been working with bereaved families and all of this learning. So I want to invest my time and the education that I have, share it with the world. So one way to do that is is through the workshops that I do, for me to share this accumulation of experience and knowledge. This is something that I can then turn around and share with the world. So that's how I got there.
Well, it just seems like you just kept investing in what you've invested in, and it was such a beautiful calling, and such a needed calling. Um, what do you find to be man's greatest struggle when it comes to trying to tap into that spirituality? Is it the where do I go now because I don't have to get up at a certain time to go do what I have to do? Where do people struggle the most?
Well, I think the lifestyle that we live in is filled with distractions. We're one of the huge changes in life has been media, social media, and all the distractions that we have. There's no real time to take a walk in the woods where you have time to reflect and time to renew yourself, right? Because we're living busy, complicated, filled with media and distractions that will not allow us to focus on what is my spiritual journey. That gets lost. So I would say that's one of the biggest challenges.
So now we've identified the challenge. Where do we begin? How do we tune out the noise and really be able to tap into I mean, here in our family, we love sunrises and we watch the sunrise. And we're just together, the four of us.
Yeah.
It's become like a reboot.
Right.
And we notice that the day lasts longer. The day is fuller. It feels like almost like when you get off on the right foot and you just feel like you're flowing, And I really attribute that to spirituality. One, I get to see something beautiful and get to be with those that I love the most.
I mean, that reminds me that when I asked baby boomers, can you describe a time when you had a profound spiritual experience? So many of them went to a moment in nature. That's a good place to start, but it also requires some reflection. What is your life meaning and purpose, right? How might honor, dignity, and empowerment contribute to spiritual well-being? How might chaos, uprootedness, or marginalization impact your spiritual self? What is the impact of the loneliness and solitude? One of the things that we didn't discuss was one of the emotional challenges of the third age is integration versus despair. Eric Erikson is a famous psychologist that talked about this. At the end of life, I lived the good life. This was great. And I feel a sense of gratitude for the life that I've lived. Or you look at your life in the rearview mirror and say, my career was a failure. I've been a poor father, right? I've failed my children, my wife. So this is a huge, huge question for the golden age because we have time to think about those things. How am I going to end my life, right? Angry with my family, issues of unforgiveness, resentment, or integration, which is, it is well with my soul. So these are ultimately they're spiritual questions.
I can't wait to get my hands on the workbook. We deal with a lot of folks that have those regrets.
Right, and that breaks your heart.
Where do we get the book, Reverend?
It's on Amazon.com.
Okay.
And just write in Dale Allen Young in the Amazon search bar. Go to books and just put spiritual temperature. Spiritual temperature will get both of the books.
I'm going to order it today.
Yeah, thank you. That's, I think, a good way to start.
Yeah.
Because it's more than just taking a walk in the woods.
We've had several employees within our almost 20-year now span that have retired, but they come and work for us because that's their calling. Their calling is to be a caregiver and to add value to an older adult's life. And it's been wonderful. It's been wonderful to have them on our team because they know why they're there.
So like I say, you don't have to be a Bill Gates or Jimmy Carter to do something. You can make an impact anywhere, but it starts with your spiritual core. What is your spiritual self, and what's the message you want to project into your golden age, and what is the encore song that you want, believe that's your legacy, right? It all starts with your spiritual core, right? Who are you, right? Spiritually. And then how do you project that?
I love it. And I love what you're doing. And I thank you tremendously for joining me today. You've given us a lot to think about. I'm certainly going to go to Amazon once I hang up here, and I'm going to order the book.
All right, great. Thank you. And if I can help with, if anybody wants to start a group or something and you want some tips on how to do that, I would say the companion workbook is the place to go. It refers to the first book. I'm also coming out with the first book in Spanish soon, so we can have Spanish-speaking groups as well.
We can find you at soulrefresh.org.
And you might want to take a look. If you scroll down on my page and go in there, I've got things, resources. So it's not just about offering the resource books, but it's also about the articles. So explore.
Tools for life.
Yes.
Thank you, Reverend. Much appreciated.
All right. Have a blessed day.